Okay, everyone, I think we can get started. So, hello, welcome to the Bartlett Together Festival 2021. My name is Christoph Lindner. I am the Dean of the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment here at UCL. And I'm joined today by two students, Julian and Farah, and we'll be meeting them properly in just a moment. But I wanted to begin by saying a few words about what our Bartlett Together Festival is all about, and also just to share a few details about how the format for today's event is set up. So why do we have the Bartlett Together Festival? And the reason we're doing this is because it's so important to start the new academic year on the right note and on a positive note. And as an academic community over the last year or so during the pandemic, we've needed to work really hard to remain connected, to continue to share ideas and share passions, and really work as an academic community who sees and spends time with each other, even if it's mostly online. This year, as we go into the new academic year, we're hoping to be in a little bit of a different place where we're able to welcome lots of students back to campus here in London. But we also know that we have students who aren't yet able to join us in London. And so we want to make sure that they're able to connect virtually to all of our activities and our programs. So we're doing the very, very best to welcome people in person in London and extend programming and education as far as possible to accommodate those who are still elsewhere. So wherever you are in the world, whether you're right here on the Bloomsbury campus or in another country or many time zones away, wonderful that you can join us. Thank you for being here and a very, very warm welcome. I see that we have over 500 people live online at the webinar at the moment, and that's fantastic. So it's great that so many people are joining us. And if you haven't yet seen the program for this week, we've got a whole range of events happening throughout the week. They're open and available to everybody. You can sign up online. So please do check out the program and sign up for as much as you like, and come along and get to know the Bartlett, get to know some of your teaching staff, and get to know some fellow students. Today's event, we're going to be focusing on something called the Commitment to Change. And I'll say a little bit more about what that involves in a minute. But to explain a little bit the format for our webinar, first of all, this is for me very exciting. I'm in a real place. So Julian and I are in an actual physical place together. We are at the Here East facility on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in the Bartlett TV studio. And it's just wonderful to be in a location with others. And if you are wondering what the Here East facility is all about, it's one of the Bartlett's many different spaces. And it's a really large, I'm looking out right now over the space, it's a really large building that we share with some other programs and faculties, including engineering. And we have lots of experimental, edgy, creative programs and research activity happening here. So I hope that during your time at the Bartlett, you get to explore the London Bloomsbury campus, but don't forget about Here East. It's definitely worth coming out here, checking out the building and the surrounding area. So we're here live in the studio, but Farah, who I hope you can see on the screen next to me, is joining us virtually from Pakistan, where she's now currently based. And of course, you're tuning in from all around the world. We have the ability to take your questions, and so please do already start thinking about things that you might like to ask me or Julian or Farah. You can use the Q&A button, which should be towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, and anything that you would like to ask, please type it in there, and I will do my very best to pick it up on the computer next to me, and we will try to answer your questions. We want to give you a bit of time to sink into the topic of the commitment to change. So before we turn to your questions, I'm first going to chat a little bit with Farah and Julian, and then we'll start looking at your questions and bringing those into the conversation. Just so that you're aware, this session is being recorded. It will be made available to you afterwards if you want to rewatch it, and it's also going to be up on our YouTube channel. So lots of ways to access it, and that should be pretty fun. So let's get to the topic that brings us together today. And I know that for students who are joining us for the first time, you probably have lots and lots of questions about what the Bartlett is all about, what life is like at the Bartlett, what it means to study here. And we have a whole series of question and answer sessions coming up during the week. And so that'll be a place where we will try to answer a lot of your practical questions. But I think there's another bigger, more philosophical question that all of us here at the Bartlett are engaged in, which is the question of how do we build a better future? In a way, regardless of what part of the Bartlett you're in, and we have 12 different schools and institutes and more than 80 different teaching programs, whatever program you're in, whatever school is home to you, in one way or another, we all share this common question: how do we build a better future? And today we want to spend a bit of time talking about what that means. And actually, from our pre-pandemic days, we printed this out. It's a document that's basically the same thing that exists on the website. So if you've been to the Bartlett homepage and looked for the commitment to change, it's exactly the same as what's on this big piece of paper here. But I thought I would bring the big piece of paper with me because I think it's really fun to refer to it. And there's a little bit of a history, so that's why I have the piece of paper here. 2 years ago, the Bartlett celebrated its 100-year anniversary as a faculty. And as part of that, we held a public exhibition, and we invited our students, our staff, and the general public to come and share their views, their thinking, their questions about what the next 100 years will bring for cities and communities. What are the issues that we need to be thinking about over the coming century? And we brought together all of the feedback that we received, and we used that to craft what I think we could loosely describe as a manifesto. So I think of the commitment to change as the Bartlett's manifesto. And what is a manifesto? It's not necessarily a plan. It's more a set of provocations. So it's us trying to take a stand, say some provocative things, be a little bit radical in our thinking, and articulate some shared ambitions, some goals and aspirations for the future. So what kind of world do we want to be living in over the next 100 years? And what are some of the things that we can do from the Bartlett to help make that happen? And we organized our responses around 12 different themes, which in one way or another connect to all the things that we do here at the Bartlett. And don't worry, I'm not expecting you to be able to read the tiny little print on the page. You can find that on the Bartlett website if you just Google commitment to change. So we have 12 sets of provocations, 12 thematic themes around which we are trying to mobilize our passion, mobilize our expertise, and dig deeper in our research and studies. And today, I'd like to invite all of us to spend some time thinking about it. One important thing, and then I promise we'll get on to Julian and Farah and we'll hear some other voices. But one important thing to stress that is in having this welcoming session organized around the commitment to change, we are not asking you to adopt it. We're not asking you to be necessarily on board with these 12 themes. Rather, this is a set of ideas around which we can debate and discuss. And indeed, I would suggest that we need to always be critically self-reflective. We need to always be questioning and problematizing these themes because the answers are not simple. And I think that's where innovation thrives, when we don't just accept things for granted, but when we question and push back and critique. So that's what today is all about, like starting to open a faculty-wide conversation going into the new academic year around the big question of how do we build a better future? What do we mean by better, and what kind of futures in the plural do we want to unlock and make possible in our world? So to help us get into that conversation, I'm joined today by Farah and Julian, and I would just love to invite them to introduce themselves in their own words, tell us a little bit about what they are studying or have studied. And I think we'd also love to hear a bit about what it's been like studying at the Bartlett so far and what brought you to the Bartlett. Maybe a little bit about your story of how you found your way to London and to our programs. Let me begin by inviting Farah to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Everybody, I'm really happy that you guys have joined the session. We have more than 750 people here now as participants. My name is Farah Khan, and I'm from Pakistan. I've recently pursued a Master of Public Administration in Innovation, Public Policy, and Public Value from Bartlett's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL. I am back in Pakistan since I've completed my degree, still waiting for the results to come in. And in Pakistan, I serve as the Deputy Commissioner for Inland Revenue Service. So my MPA in Innovation, Public Policy, and Public Value was essentially very much needed for me to understand what is lacking in me as a bureaucrat for the 21st century and as a bureaucrat who wants to improve and a civil servant who wants to make the world a better place for everybody to live in. And so this MPA really helped me with that. This was one of the reasons that I chose this program. One of the reasons that I chose UCL was as obvious because of its ranking, its faculty, the facilities it extends to you. But I was in for a surprise when I went through the course material. I was introduced to ways of thinking that I never thought were there. And I think that's very critical for change makers and for leaders to be aware of. Having said that, my time at Bartlett and my Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose has been amazing. So most of the time it was online, but I have to say it had its own privileges. I've attended classes in my PJs because that's all you could see. I have had the privilege of getting to know my class fellows on a much more personal level, because when you're on Zoom, you're generally inside your room or your personal spaces, and you get to meet their families because there's constant interaction going on. I got to meet a lot of pets, which was definitely not possible on campus. People had their cats crashing their Zoom meetings with us, their classes. We had dogs asking for attention. So it was, I would say, a much more personal experience, but in a very different way. This time was also very important for me to realize the things that I had taken for granted were not supposed to be taken granted for at all. The value of open public spaces, for example, parks. I always took parks very for granted, and it's this pandemic and my degree at UCL which made me realize how important they were and the role they played, where I could meet my class fellows in an open space, where I have a dog at home and I used to miss my pet a lot. So I would see people over there with their pets, and it would, give me that kind of happiness that I was looking for. So it's just that it changes perspectives, and I'm really happy that I got this opportunity, and UCL thought of me as somebody who deserved to be there as a student. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Farah. And it's great to hear actually that one of the side effects of Zoom was you got to see people in their homes and meet pets and family, which we would maybe not have been able to do otherwise. So it's nice to hear about some of the upsides as well. Julian, tell us a bit about yourself, your story, how you found your way to UCL, and what your studies have been like.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone, my name is Julian. So whenever I introduce myself, there's a bit of an identity crisis, but I'll try my best. So I'm half Sri Lankan, half Filipino, but I grew up in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and now I live in the UK. Across my life, so I've lived in the three major cities. So I've lived in Colombo, I've lived in Ho Chi Minh, and I've just recently moved here from Jakarta. And that was kind of what kind of piqued my interest in the urban environment. And that's why I currently study, I'm going into my second year in studying an undergrad in urban planning, design, and management. And for me, it's just exploring the contrast between the old and the new. It's about, wanting to create these new environments where people can thrive. And it's just, exploring this divide between cities and how all of these systems kind of work together. And one of the things I've personally noticed is kind of when it comes to planning in particular is, we can't use a, one size fits all approach. So living in the global South and now, kind of moving to the UK, you realize that there are these major planning consultancies who are trying to make things work, taking systems, mechanisms that work here and bringing it over to the global South without really thinking about how it's going to affect people there or how, it's going to work out. And so that's kind of why I think the commitment to change is quite an important thing to realize that we need to understand how these systems work, how these mechanisms work, and kind of adapt and change to prepare for the future and find innovative solutions to make things work. And in regards to my studies in the Bartlett during the first year, I mean, it was quite an interesting year, something that I'll never forget about, moving to the UK during a completely crazy time, having, most of my studies online. But I think it was a great experience, something, like I said, I'll never forget. And coming out of it, I'm looking forward to see how this year goes. Hopefully, we call it the new normal, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot from it. But I'm definitely looking forward to see how things are going to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Farah and Julian, you both have such fascinating global transnational stories, and I think that's a big part of what the Bartlett is about.
Yeah.
Our students and our staff come from all over the world, as well as all across the UK and across London. And the global kind of character and values of our community are a really important part of who we are. So let's get into the topic of the Manifesto, Commitment to Change. I'm just wondering, and we did invite Farah and Julian to have a close look at it before we got into today's topic, so I'm not being cruel by popping questions on them. But I'd love to hear a little bit, given that you've been thinking about this manifesto for a little while now, if there are particular themes or ideas within it that jumped out to you as particularly interesting and relevant, or maybe outrageous and inappropriate. Farah, why don't we begin with you? What are some of your initial responses to the Bartlett Commitment to Change?
Thank you, Dean. I'll just take a minute to maybe take everyone through the building blocks of the commitment to change. There were 12. The first one being climate change, then resilience, then equality, moving on to recycling and reuse, housing, public good, design education, inclusivity, planning policy, nature, data and technology, and health and well-being. Now, my master's in public administration, basically, really made me think about two of these essentially, and it was very difficult to keep the rest of them out of those two. The two that I'm going to talk about are planning policy and public good. So I'll tell you a very interesting project that I had to do, which highlights the importance of commitment to change. For one of my courses, which is known as Transformation by Design, we had to pick up any problem around us and try to see it through newer lens. And in my group, we chose the problem of dog culling in Pakistan. So the stray dogs, we have this issue of stray dogs, and the line of action that the government has currently taken or has taken for quite some time has been culling them. Now, there have been NGOs that have been trying to move it towards TNR, which is trap, neuter, and return. But when I started working on this with my class fellows, we realized that this was not maybe just an issue of interaction between humans and dogs. It was something much deeper. It was about where the cities were dumping their garbage. It was about how we were not thinking that this place was theirs to begin with. And we had no rights to create roads and houses and cut down on their space to begin with. And, we started seeing it through different lens, and it made us question our position, our authority, our privileges. We were able to see things through a dog's perspective, and that was very new to us. But when we did that, we came up with, I wouldn't say the best solutions, but I would say newer solutions. Definitely newer solutions that did not involve, removing of a different species just because, we want to live in a space that we have to share with them. And when we were doing that, we asked ourselves, so I had some class fellows who said, but you're trying to protect dogs, and that's going to be very difficult for future cities which want to be truly pedestrian cities. So how would pedestrians survive with stray dogs? And so, there were challenges. There were people who wanted to look out for the dogs, and there were people who wanted to look out for pedestrian cities. And so it was that pull and that push that created more interesting solutions. It's the diversity that was offered to me in my classroom, that global diversity. I had more than 32 nationalities in my class. So, when those 32 views from the globe came in, it helped us come up with such interesting ways of dealing with this, which had nothing to do with culling of the dogs, and had so much to do with coexistence and how to change mindsets. I'll give you an example. One of my Chilean class fellows and friends pointed out to me that they love stray dogs in their country, to the extent that their stray dogs are mostly chubby because they feed them so much. So, and it was very hard for me to understand, because in my country, they were subject to ridicule, torture, and, like I said, culling and poisoning. So, I had to go in and understand their culture and why their behavior as human beings was so different to stray dogs as compared to my community, and try to bridge that gap through newer ways, newer ideas. And when we did that, we realized how code of ethics is very important for government officials as well. So it's legal to cull dogs, but is it ethical? So, we got into that debate, and it made me realize that we have so much more responsibility towards public good and shared spaces and planning policy and nature and design. So I hope that gives you some insight into why commitment to change is so important and crucial.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic set of insights. That's really, really interesting, and something I took away from your comments, and I hope I'm paraphrasing this correctly, was the importance of diversity of thinking and diversity of experiences for being able to create truly innovative or new solutions to whatever the problem is. And I think that's a really important lesson: diversity of experience and perspective and knowledge. Yeah. Julian, what about you? If I invite you to give us an initial response to the commitment to change, any aspect of it that jumped out as interesting, difficult, problematic, or otherwise?
Well, I think one of the great things, so I have the massive leaflet here as well. It's great that, we've kind of touched on a lot of the major issues that are kind of facing, the built environment in the coming years in preparation for the future. And I've noticed these kind of have a parallel with, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is great. But I think one thing that we shouldn't be limited is like, this isn't, of course, all that we have to think about and manage. There are so many other different issues that are coming our way, especially towards the built environment, that we need to start thinking about, things that we probably won't expect at all, especially with this, the pandemic, it's given us a lot of food for thought. But from what I've started thinking about from my course in urban planning, I think what's kind of jumped out to me are the issues of climate change and being inclusive. And so the professors on my courses have started, pushing us to go beyond the boundaries of, design and start thinking about creating spaces that will truly cater to the needs of the environment, but also cater to everyone, make spaces that are more accessible. So I'm just thinking of one module, for example. So it's just an introduction to urban design. We have this space near King's Cross. So it was currently a community garden, and what we had to do was think of an idea to redevelop the area to make it, a better place, make it more inclusive for all. And so there's, so many things you can do, but I think with the whole, climate change and inclusive, it's designing spaces for everyone. So no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter, if you have a disability, it's making sure anyone can go to and use these spaces. Responsive street furniture, every single design choice that you make has to be specific, and you have to ensure that it works for everyone. And there's also the whole idea of climate change, which is obviously a really, really big issue that we're dealing with right now. And some of the design choices that you see, in the built environment are quite particular. You might not notice it at first, but you do eventually realize, things like vertical gardens, the specific types of plants that we use in parks or trees, water features, stormwater drainage. These are really important to ensure that we deal with climate change. And like I said, you don't notice it at first, but after you take a particular look at these, it kind of jumps out to you, and you start realize everything, seems different. So I think those things are kind of what brings everything together with the commitment to change.
Yeah. So you referenced two things that I think are on the minds of lots and lots of people across the faculty, so that's fantastic. Climate change, which I think in one way or another, all of us in all programs and in our lives and for the next several generations and maybe much longer, will be grappling with in increasingly real and urgent ways. And this is probably a good place just to acknowledge that our faculty is trying to get more organized, more joined up around what we can do from the position of the built environment disciplines and professions to intervene positively and address the very unequal effects of climate change. And so we do have a climate action initiative that we're trying to build momentum around within the faculty. And we have a website for that. So if you're interested in those kinds of issues, I would encourage you to check it out. But a lot of the work that we do in our modules, in our programs, and in our research really bubbles up from the academic community. Yeah. And so I do think it's important for our students and our staff to be highlighting, making visible the issue of climate change wherever we can, but also pushing us as a faculty to do more and do better wherever we can around that. And I'm hoping that we're going to have some announcements this week in our faculty at the Bartlett about some of the commitments we want to take to contribute positively to climate action. So stay tuned for some announcements, hopefully, around that coming out soon. But you also mentioned inclusion. And I think that's another really, really critical issue in society today, in higher education today. And we do have a series of events. a program that began last year, and we're continuing it this year, which is called Inclusive Spaces. And it's designed for everybody at the faculty. And it's a place where we come together and share thinking, learning, research that we do around inclusion issues, and they are many, so that we can work as a faculty to be ever more inclusive, but also think about how our work can have an effect outside in the real world and contribute towards making, more inclusive spaces, kind of like what you were talking about. So this is fantastic. So great to hear some of your thoughts, Julian, and yours as well, Farah. Julian, you alluded to, well, there's things beyond these 12 themes that we also need to be thinking about. And I really like that, because in a way, the moment you start pinning down a commitment and saying, here are the areas that we're really focused on, it immediately raises the question, well, what else is out there? And I guess a thought or a question that I have for both you, Farah, and Julian, is do you have any initial ideas on how the pandemic is beginning to surface new issues for the world to grapple with? So what new paradigms, what new inequalities, what new issues are we starting to see in the world that we also need to be putting on our academic radar screen?
I mean, I don't mind. So I think one of the initial things that we kind of first discovered during the beginning of the course of the pandemic is, this idea of social distancing. And I think we've noticed like several projects, like I know in the UK, for example, we have the idea of street space. It's, increasing the size of pavements to ensure that everyone is, able to distance themselves from each other. And then there's also the boom of, cycling, walking, instead of taking public transport, obviously to keep safe, but also to increase your own health and well-being. And also one of the things that I've noticed is how people are starting to move away from working in offices and starting to move towards remote working. And you see, lots of people actually starting to think about moving away from living in cities, going to commuter towns, or actually moving further away than that, in order to, just kind of start a new life, I guess, especially because since the increase of remote working, people aren't really, fussed about, doing their long commute to work, and that kind of thing.
But see, I commuted this morning for the first time in a long time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I'm sure I'll get bored with it, I'm sure I'll get frustrated, but it was so nice to get up in the dark, wait for a train, get rained on a little bit, put on my headphones, listen to some music, go somewhere, grab a coffee, see other people. And I think there's a bigger question here, which is, are we going through a permanent shift where we're really reprogramming our lives and our workplaces, or will we snap back to our old ways? And I think we don't know maybe the answer, but we maybe have our suspicions. But I just want to put in a plea for cities as still being places that actually they've found ways of being vibrant, I think, even during the heights of lockdown. But at the same time, the need for space, green space in particular, has drawn a lot of people out into the countryside, to the point where we're starting to see something you might even describe as rural gentrification happening in countries like the UK. Lots to unpack there, but I want to bring in Farah as well. And then just to let you know, we'll start looking at the questions in the Q&A. So if there are things that you would like to ask us, please type them in, and we will try to pick up your questions and have you help to shape the direction of our conversation. But before we move to your questions, Farah, do you have any insights or theories about how the pandemic is creating new dynamics in our world that we need to be studying and understanding as part of thinking about the future of cities and communities?
Yes, there are two things that were the heart of our discussion quite frequently during the pandemic within my classroom. One was definitely Zoom fatigue. We never thought that it would hit us because, we're young and life is fun, but Zoom fatigue was real for all of us. And we realized the importance of human contact and how much we craved it and how much we missed it. So that was one thing that has once again developed a lot of value. We were being pulled into a lot of technology and gadgets, to say, like, my generation has been very keen on technology and gadgets, but this year has been a shocker and has made all of us realize how important our friends are, how important human contact is, and how important it is to, see somebody in person as well. Apart from this, there was one other theme which made a lot of discussions, was how countries uh, suffered due to the supply chain issues that arose, and how countries had to uh, be self-sufficient in some core areas, one of them being nutrition for the health and well-being. There were import disruptions around food, even around PPE, and that all got us thinking how we need to rethink and reprioritize what our industrial policy needs to look like as a country, as a region. So, these were important themes that came up in front of us due to pandemic.
Thank you. Farah, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I find your comments really to combine policy and poetry in really evocative ways. So you've already talked to us about chubby street dogs, Zoom cats, and now you said something that I think is really important about how in the era of the post-human, in a world increasingly dominated by technology and post-human experiences, we, through the pandemic, have rediscovered the value of very basic human interaction and contact. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. On the question of supply chain, if you've read the news at all, for anybody based in the UK, or if you read the UK news, you'll see this week that we're going through a lot of supply chain issues affecting everything from petrol to supermarket shelves to the potential canceling of turkeys at Christmas time. So that's very much on people's minds. I'm going to start picking up some of the questions from our audience, and let's see what's been coming in. And I think a really interesting question that's being asked is to, I'll just read it out. So in terms of climate change and inclusivity, the comment is, everybody wants more sustainable cities, but far fewer people accept the changes required to make cities more sustainable, such as reducing car usage being one obvious example. So how can placemakers, and in a way across the Bartlett, in one version or another, we're all placemakers, how can we actually help to create more sustainable communities, particularly when it comes to changing people's minds or changing people's behaviors? Any thoughts on that? I'll invite you, Julian, to get us going.
I think there's a sense of, the idea of climate change has been, pushed for quite a few years now, especially with the onset of, global warming. But I think with the whole, the built environment, there's a sense of more subtle changes in how we structure our, the built environment, or how we construct, how we design things. And so, like I mentioned before, it's things that you don't really notice at first, like green walls, vertical gardens, stormwater drainage systems. These are things that we're like slowly implementing. I know in London, there's a lot of rooftop gardens in order to combat the rising carbon dioxide emissions. But in terms of changing people's behavior, that's something that's quite a bit more difficult. Especially since there are, people who are still, in denial of climate change, for example. And that's something that's a bit more difficult to implement into their heads. And I think with that, it's just the sense of, campaigning, pushing for more education towards it, integrating it more into the curriculums of schools, but also pushing it on a larger scale, I would say.
Yeah. And then on the policy side, Farah, I know that's a bit your area of specialty, policy, public affairs. How can policy help us create more sustainable cities?
Thank you, Dean. So it's interesting that this brings me back to this conversation we had with our professor, Carlota Perez.
Mhm.
And so we were discussing any ideas that would be sustainable for decades to come in the policy arena. And so we were having a hard time understanding how sustainable something needs to be to really make a difference in climate change. So she gave us an example, and I'm going to borrow it because she explained it so beautifully, and I can't do it any better. So I'm going to borrow her example. She explained by using an example of a manufacturing supply chain of refrigerators. So she said the refrigerators nowadays break down after a couple of years, like they maybe live with you for maybe 10 years or something. She said, and most of the employment is front loaded towards manufacturing. And that is why the life of these items is 10 years, so that we run out of them and then we have to make those purchases again. She said we have to think about this in another way. Why not make refrigerators that outlive us, that maybe stay there for 100 years, and then load your employment into services, into repair. So your consumption of material will reduce because you're manufacturing once in 100 years, and the need for humans to be engaged and to keep making a living will also be protected, because for that 100 years of refrigerator to survive, you would need lots of services, repair, maintenance. And she said your employment needs to be maybe loaded over there. And it really got us thinking that, yes, we need to start challenging even the most basic of notions that we've ever had on how supply chains are supposed to work, on how this world works. And it was, I would say, very brilliantly put as to how things need to be sustainable for a better climate.
And I think what both of your comments, Julian and Farah, had in common is that you were referencing that the importance of having an impact or changing something out in the world. So this isn't, if you want to create more sustainable cities, it can't just be theoretical, it can't just be imaginative or speculative. At a certain point, there has to be an intervention, an action, some kind of influence or impact, whether that's through designing a space or changing a policy, those kinds of things. And so it connects to another question that I think is really interesting, where we are being asked how we would describe the role of the Bartlett's commitment to change outside the faculty, outside the university. So it's great for us inside the Bartlett to be all excited and committed and focused on building a better future. But if we're not reaching and influencing and positively impacting the world outside, then what effect does it really have? So I'll just take a small stab at answering part of that question, and then I'll open it up to both of you. But one thing that I would say about the external effects of our commitment to change is that part of what we're trying to do at the Bartlett is prepare the next generation of professionals who will be entering all of the built environment professions. So we want our graduating students not just to join professions, but to transform and lead those professions in new and better directions. So I think education is an extraordinarily powerful tool for change. And that's a huge part of what we're about at the Bartlett and UCL and universities in general. So that's one way in which every year thousands of graduating students go out into the world, join businesses, companies, organizations, communities, and through their work, through their practice, start affecting leadership and change. That's one way. But what other ways can we make a difference out in the world?
I think definitely, like, I completely agree with what you've said. every student who graduates from the Bartlett is going to kind of inspire the next generation of placemakers. And I think that's just, the influence of what our graduates do from the Bartlett is going to basically just create, the next great thing. Like all the students here, all the innovations, how bright they are, they're just going to push the boundaries of what's possible. And that's going to encourage other people to kind of take upon that idea and, want to create the next generation and create the next big thing for the future, I would say.
Mhm. Thank you. And Farah, any thoughts or comments from you?
I think, Dean, you've been so spot on about it. As a tax administrator, I've been consistently thinking about how, as part of a tax administration, can IRS in my country promote sustainability by giving tax incentives to businesses who involve themselves in being more sustainable. So the state is not there to just regulate and correct the market. It is also there to create the market. So if you have tax incentives, you're essentially creating a market for businesses to enter into, and business does not have to be bad or looked down upon. It's a partner, and it's supposed to be taken along on the journey of sustainability as well. So that's one of the ways that I think I will struggle, but very happily struggle to perform in with regards to sustainability in my country.
Thank you. And again, something I'm sensing in both of your sets of comments is an ambition, but also an optimism, right? So the world is not bleak. We're not on a dead end path. We still have agency. We still have the ability to influence, to change, to impact. And the future is not something we inherit. The future is something that we can make and remake. I want to keep picking up questions, and we have one here asking us about examples of Bartlett alumni who have gone on to do transformative things in the world. And it wouldn't be fair to just pick out one or two names. There are so many examples. And one of my privileges as a dean is to hear the stories of our graduates and what they've gone on to do with their lives. And there are just thousands of stories out there. And if you spend some time on our website, we have alumni profiles on various school pages, and you can come across some of those amazing stories. But the other part of that person's question, and let me just pull it up there, is, oh, it just disappeared. So I didn't get the second part. That's okay though. Oh yes, I remember now. So it was the second part of that question was about what advice do we have for students who still don't know what path they want to take after the Bartlett. So when people come and do a degree, they may have a very clear idea of what job they want to try to do, or it might be that they are yet unsure and still exploring where their professional interests lie. And so I think wherever people are on the spectrum, laser focused on, I know I want to be a planner, I know I want to be, a policy advisor, to, well, I'm just interested in cities, or I'm interested in design, and I want to explore this. Do you have any advice or thoughts for our audience on how to worry or not worry about the post-Bartlett experience, post-Bartlett future?
I'm going to say, just as a current student myself, I came into this whole, my degree with kind of an idea of what I might want to study after I graduate from the Bartlett, but it wasn't really set in stone. And I just want to emphasize that I think definitely keep your options open, because there are always new things that come about, especially with the rise of, digital technology. There's so many career paths that are opening up. And I think, if you do study urban planning or architecture, there are so many different pathways that you can go into. I recommend that you explore every possible module that you have, and you can see if you develop an interest for this or that. And then, as you spend your time at the Bartlett, you'll be able to kind of build an idea of what you really want to do in the future and beyond that.
Okay, And Farah, you have completed your studies. So now that you're in your post-Bartlett life, any initial experiences or advice that you would share?
So the first thing that everybody is doing right is keeping their options open. So, because when you keep your options open, there is more space for you to experiment. And that's what I would first of all advise you all to do. Everybody has a limited amount of life in this world, and just don't waste it by being a stickler for something that somebody else expected you to do. So always keep your options open and always be burning with this desire to learn more and to do more and be more. The two things that I would advise people in terms of trying to decide where to go is, first of all, look at your faculty, your professors, their research work, their areas of interest, and see if there's something that you particularly like, and lock times with them. I loved doing that with my professors. Even though I have a profession that I had to come back to in Pakistan, I still liked exploring artificial intelligence with one of the research assistants we had, who was doing his PhD at UCL. So, just keep it open and try to connect to your professors and your seniors to get ideas, to get inspired. And the other thing that you all can do is just look at your peers. In your classroom, everybody will be coming in at the master's level, at least, from a different set of skills and at a different level of service that they've had in their life so far. So you can learn things, the kind of professions that exist in the world, the different pathways they've taken to be where they are today. So that gives you ideas.
Good advice. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on another question that's come up in the chat. And someone has made the very astute observation that the Bartlett Manifesto commitment to change, that the themes that are covered in there are very broad. And the issues that they raise are very large and complex. And so they require a lot of collaboration and disciplinary knowledge across areas in order to tackle. And so their question was, so, what are the possibilities? Where are the spaces and mechanisms for collaboration, co-creation, co-thinking, co-work in the Bartlett? And I think that's a really, really great question to ask, because while each of you will be based in and have a home in a particular school, institute, department, and maybe even more specifically within an individual program, all of you, all of us, are part of this larger faculty. And we do love to try to connect across our different areas of interest and expertise. And there are lots of ways you can do that. So sometimes programs will have built into what they're doing interaction with other programs, other schools. And so if you have those opportunities, fantastic, they're already going to be built into your experience. But the key thing is we are constantly organizing events which are open to our community. And it could be film screenings, it could be a workshop or a conference, it could be a series of lectures or seminars, it could be exhibitions, installations, it could be outings and ramblings, but there's always stuff going on all across the faculty, which is open to everybody. And so if you are new to the Bartlett, I really encourage you to explore the events. And this year, as we start to program more in-person activity, we're still going to have a lot of things like Bartlett Together Festival, which are online, but we're going to also have more things alongside that will happen in person. So be looking for those opportunities to go to things that are of interest, and just know that you're always welcome. If it's advertised, if we're putting it on our website, it means you are welcome, you can come, and please do come along. And not only will that expose you to an enormous diversity of thinking, I mean, the range of stuff that happens at the Bartlett, academically, intellectually, professionally, is astounding and inspiring. And as dean, I never stop learning. I mean, I'm just amazed. Everything I go to, I will learn something. And from our students, from our staff, from our guests, there's just so much intellectual knowledge and energy and exchange that happens. So please come along and participate in that. I'm going to pause there because as students, you probably have direct experience of trying to do this kind of stuff. So what advice would you share? And I'll invite Farah in first this time.
I think, Dean, it's important to not only attend these events, but also join the plethora of societies that UCL has. Those societies have no limitations or bounds. I mean, if I wanted to join the data science society, I could have done that. I still went ahead and I joined the UCL hiking club because I love being outdoors and it was my license to do that. They arranged amazing hikes and it was just lovely exploring UK through them. But it's just that when I was on those hikes, I met people from so many disciplines from within the UCL, and we were able to talk about our sandwiches to global warming. Like that's the breadth of our discussions. So these societies, I would say, are a good starting point if you want to develop cross networks with other departments or with students with different levels of education.
I mean, with me, one of the modules, in terms of collaboration, one of the modules that I had in my first year, so I'm in the planning department, but I had a module with students from the School of Architecture and also from, project construction management. So we were assigned a project in London, and we actually had to create a documentary regarding that space. And I think that was one of the most interesting modules for me because we had this opportunity to learn from others and collaborate with them, gain different perspectives, different viewpoints on what they thought about this and what they thought about that. And for me, that just kind of really brought in the whole experience together. Even though, we did most of it online, we still did manage to collaborate, lots of cross-cultural thinking, learning from other people's experiences, where they've grown up, and then create this one piece of work that truly represented who we were as a faculty. And I think that's just another great part of the Bartlett's, the interdisciplinary approach to learning that kind of ties everything together.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful phrase. I love it. And of course I agree, and that's part of what attracted me to the Bartlett. It was one of the questions in the chat line was asking me as dean, well, what brought you to the Bartlett? And I think the things that attracted me are exactly the same things, I believe, that attract our students. Wanting to be part of and be able to participate in the kinds of conversations that are happening at the Bartlett around all aspects of the built environment. So there's an intellectual academic diversity here that is just unparalleled in the world. There's no other faculty. It's not so much about size, but diversity, the breadth of thinking, the breadth of knowledge. And I just love that in a faculty of the built environment, we have architects, planners, data scientists, but we also have mathematicians, playwrights, filmmakers. I once heard there was a dentist somewhere. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but I would believe it. And I think that is a huge part of the DNA, the kind of ethos, the culture, and the history of our faculty is to be open-minded and welcoming of all forms of knowledge and disciplinary practice, and to understand that if we're going to build a better future, we have to work across boundaries, across geographies, across languages, and so on. Let me keep picking up questions because I do want to try and get to as many of them as we can, and we're probably going to run out of time quite soon. So let me see what to pick up. And I think this might be a good one to start drawing our conversation to a close. And it's kind of a philosophical one. And someone here is observing that these days, particularly since the pandemic, There's been so much change in the world, and our manifesto is called a commitment to change, wanting to create more change. And the question there is, how do we know when we're making good change? You know, what change is positive? What change do we want to hang on to? And what change do we want to resist or stop? And that's a very broad question, but it's really, I think, boils down to the experience of change that we've all had in our lives, in society, but also by coming to study at a place like the Bartlett, we're going to be exposed to so many ideas and new perspectives that it will probably change us as well. So on the broad theme of change, any insights or comments? Julian?
I mean, like you said, change is a very, it's like, I would say it's like a void almost, because it's such a big empty space that you can say, change is good, change is bad. It's kind of hard to kind of, dig in deep and like explain what change really means. But I'd say, in terms of the pandemic and what's kind of, affected us in our lives, change, like I said, is something that we're all experiencing, something that we don't really know we can't really predict it. We don't know what's going to come. And it's, I don't know, it's just quite difficult to answer. It's quite a philosophical question.
It is. Let's see if Farah can offer us some more poetic insight.
I would say that change for one person can be very meaningful and very damaging at the same time for another person. We need to learn to bring everybody on board and co-create and co-design so that even if we falter, we know it was with the best of intentions and with the most diverse input that could have been incorporated to bring along the change. There are some changes that we will realize very early on that were failures, and so you just pick yourself up, fix it, and move along. And then there are some changes which we realized were very detrimental, but it takes them decades to really show. I think coal was really celebrated some centuries ago, and it's not celebrated that much nowadays. And it's taken decades for us to realize why we need to move towards renewable energy and why to dream of cleaner fuel. So, like I said, if you ask my ancestors, they'll probably not agree with me when I say that coal is hurting. The way coal is being used, it's hurting our planet. So for them, that change was beautiful. For me, it's a bit ugly, and we're trying to do something about it. So, like I said, you just have to take it one day at a time, and do your best and interpret it as best as you can with as much diverse input as possible.
And I'll just offer one reflection, and then I think we'll begin to wrap up this session. And Farah, I like what you were saying, and I think it's a really important point to highlight that the effects of change are often unequal. And so being mindful of who is affected, how they're affected, why they're affected, and looking at it through a lens that is sensitive to inequality and inequity is really important. The small comment I'll tag on to that is, if we bring this back to the Bartlett and our manifesto commitment to change, I want to focus just a moment on that word commitment rather than the word change. Because by saying we have a commitment, what are we trying to say? And I think part of what we're saying, and I do hope that you feel this in your studies, in your research, in your work and time at the Bartlett, part of what we're saying is that we want to work and think and live in a place that is slightly uncomfortable, or sometimes productively intensely uncomfortable. So what we do not want to do is to be complacent. What we do not want to do is to have stasis. We want to grow, we want to learn, and to do that, to push the boundaries, and that's a phrase that's come up, and I think it's something we all share. We're all here in one way or another to push some kind of boundary, particularly around knowledge and what we think we know around the world, about the world. So in order to do that, it does mean committing to living, working, thinking, creating in a space that is a bit uncertain, that is a bit uncomfortable, and sometimes that puts us in a place where we don't even know what the answers are to the questions we're asking. And that's not always easy. That can be intimidating, and it can sometimes be stressful, but I think it's an important place to try to be in. And that's kind of what we're getting at when we talk about the commitment to change, is us saying we're comfortable with discomfort when it comes to exploring and testing the boundaries of knowledge. So we've reached the end of our time for this opening session of the Bartlett Together Festival. But that's okay, because we have lots more coming this week. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, please check out the website program for Bartlett Together Festival 2021. We have events all through the week, culminating on Friday with a live event and a podcast recording, which you can participate in, which is on the topic of the Camden High Line. So please join us for that, as well as everything else happening this week. I really want to thank Julian and Farah for joining me today. Thank you so much, Julian, for being in the studio. And thank you so much, Farah, for beaming in from Pakistan. I just loved your comments. I loved your insights. And I'm just so happy that you could join us today. I want to thank all, I'm just checking on the counter, over 750 people who joined us for this morning's session. Thank you for being online with us. And for those of you who are in London, I really do hope to bump into you in person. If you see me walking around campus, if you see me in a building, please do stop and say hello and introduce yourself. I want to meet you. We want to all get to know each other. So I'll look out and hope to bump into people around town. But I also know that we have many students and even some staff who are joining us remotely until they're able to come to London. And I will look for opportunities to connect with you on Zoom and Teams and other online media. And in fact, we do have a number of question and answer sessions also scheduled for this week. So I will try to meet you there. So thank you for joining us. Have a fantastic festival this week. Have a fantastic academic year, and welcome to the Bartlett.